Okay, so welcome everyone to this week's ZEF colloquium. Today we'll have two presenters. One of them, most of you probably know, it's Amy Faye, who's a senior researcher here in ZEF-B. And we also have Fatou Faye, who's an economist at the Senegalese Institute for Agricultural Research. So, Amy and Fatou, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Jorge. Good morning, everyone. So let me share my screen first. Okay. So today, Fatou and I will be presenting our paper entitled Domestic or Imported Rice, an analysis of rice demand in Senegal. So this paper is co-authored with Mohamed Rasoulsi, who is at FAO, Seung-Min Lee from Cornell University, and John McPeak from Syracuse University. So I will let Fatou start first, and then I will take the floor once she finishes. So Fatou, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Ami. Thank you, everyone. So this paper is on rice demand, and why we are working on rice, because this is one of the three major crops that are cultivated worldwide, along with wheat and corn. And in many developing countries like Senegal, rice is a major determinant of food security and also political stability. And the global consumption, for example, in 2018 was estimated at more than 400 million metric tons of milled rice, and these quantities of rice were mostly consumed in developing countries. And in Africa, south of the Sahara, rice is also the main staple food in many countries. We have the example of Senegal, Nigeria, but also Ivory Coast, where rice is the major consumed cereal. And global exports in 2018, 46% of these global exports were devoted to Africa. And as I said before, so West African countries, we consume a lot of rice, but this rice is coming from outside. So we depend on importations. And if you see on the graph, 46% of importations go to West Africa. Of global importations of rice, they go to West Africa. So we highly depend on importation to consume rice. And these importations, they mainly come from Asia, countries like Thailand, Vietnam, and India. And for West Africa, Nigeria, Ivory Coast, and Senegal are the top importers in the period 2009-2019. And this dependency has many consequences. For example, it increases our budget allocated to rice. It exposes also these countries like ours to market shocks. For example, in 2008 food crisis, we had many riots here because we had a shortage of rice, and this has as a consequence many riots, people going outside, and many problems for our government. And also in this context of COVID-19, many countries, many exporting countries are placing restrictions on rice exports, and this can create a shortage in the supply for importing countries. And this can also increase the domestic prices in imported countries. And so in face to all these problems, what are the policies? What policies are implemented to reduce this dependency? To answer this question, we will take the example of Senegal. For example, here, our government has put restriction on foreign competition through import quotas since 2015, and also bans. Our government has put some bans on categories, on some rice categories, which they suppose are competing with local rice. And these bans have been implemented since 2017. Also, another solution to face this increased dependency is to increase domestic production. And this has been done through huge investments in fertilizers, finance, and equipment. And to implement these investments, our state has put many programs. For example, we had the National Program for Rice Self-Sufficiency, which started in 2008, and also a program for accelerating the growth rate of agriculture. However, given all these programs and all these measures, we see that rice imports are still increasing. If you look at the graph, you see that since the beginning of the PNA, for example, rice import is increasing. We can have many explanations for this increase, but what we suspect is that our policies are mainly focusing on supply side, while literature has shown that demand side is also important. And so literature on rice demand in developing countries has mainly focused on Asia, because Asia is a large area of rice consumption. And these household studies, they were implemented in countries like Vietnam, Philippines, Bangladesh, Myanmar. And what they showed is that rice demand was driven by population growth, rising income, dietary changes, and urbanization. Differences were also found in these studies between rural and urban households. They have different preferences and different expenditure patterns. And in this large literature, Africa has received less attention. So here we have a research gap. All the existing studies, they examine the demand, but for a big country, which is Nigeria. So many studies focus on Nigeria, and usually also they found that local and imported rice are normal good, and that consumers are willing to consume a high quality local rice. They also found that urban consumers are more demanding in terms of quality than rural households. Regarding the research gap also here in Senegal, many studies we have, they focus on preferences and not on assessing the characteristics of demand. And what they find as a result is that the improvement of local rice is important and has been done via the use of seed varieties and processing, a better processing of rice. And so we have a lack of evidence on the demand side, particularly on both urban and rural households. And this is not taken into account in precedent literature, and also spatial factors, they are not sufficiently investigated. Why? Because we often lack nationally representative data. And here in our paper, we have two main questions. The first is, what are the determinants of local rice consumption? And we are using a double header model. And our second question is focusing characteristics on demand by studying price and income elasticities. So to talk a little bit more on the context, as you see, Senegal is a country in West Africa, a coastal country, and rice is the most consumed cereal. It surpasses all traditional crops like sorghum, millet, but also maize. And 77% of rice consumption is coming from urban areas, and of total cereals consumption, excuse me, and 49% in rural areas. So urban households are those households that consume cereals and also rice. And we are seeing rising demand due to the low processing and cooking costs of rice. So processing rice requires many efforts. So when the processing is improved, we are seeing an increase in demand. Also, urbanization is increasing demand and population growth. And beyond this, we also have a change in the consumption habits. So Senegalese households are consuming less traditional cereals. And regarding preferences for rice, Senegalese household, they prefer imported rice over local rice. Why? Because there are quality criteria that are met by imported and not by local rice. And we also have a strong preference for broken imported rice. And this is related to our main dish, which is made by broken rice. And given that we prefer imported, so broken imported rice is more consumed in Senegalese households. And consumers, particularly urbans, they have become demanding about quality. They want a good quality rice while also remaining alert to the rice quality price ratio. And for this study, we use data coming from a project called the Agricultural Policy Support Project, which took place between 2015 and 2019. And in our sample, we have more than 6,000 households from 2 different surveys, a urban survey and a rural survey. The urban survey was conducted in 2017 with around 2,200 households, which are located in 19 major cities in Senegal. And the rural data, they were collected in 2018, and they cover around 400 to 1,000 households, which are located in areas where agriculture is rain-fed. So this is a nationwide stratified sample, and the urban data are nationally representative. A limit is in our rural data, which are only representative of 3 of the 5 agroecological zones in Senegal. So we have 2 agroecological zones that are missing in our rural data. And these are the areas of irrigated agriculture, which include the Senegalese River Valley and the main horticulture producing area, the coastal Ndèye. So these are the 2 agroecological zones that are missing in our rural sample. And one consequence of this problem is that maybe we will underestimate the consumption of own produce rice, because we do not have in our sample the area where rice is mainly produced. So I will give the floor to Ami, and she will talk about, oh, sorry, I have 1 slide left. And so regarding methodology, we have 2 questions. The first one is looking at the determinants of local rice consumption. So for this question, we will use the double model, and our dependent variable will be the quantity of local rice consumed. And the quantity is the monthly quantity, because the data was collecting on a monthly basis. But this variable is a limited one. We have 44% households that do not consume local rice. So given this, we will use a double order model in 2 stages. And the first one is to model the consumption decision using a binary variable. And the second stage will be to look at the determinants of consumption. And so we have a demi-variable representing decision to consume. We have socio-demo characteristics, and we have our error term. And the socio-demo characteristics, there are age, area cultivated if we are in local area. We have also income, which is proxied by asset ownership, but also total. Here we do not include total expenditure. So income is proxied by asset ownership, and durables for urban and rural. We have also special variables. We disaggregated urban in many strata related to population. So these are this is our model for the determinants of local rice consumption. And so, Ami, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Ndèye Fatou, for your presentation. So now I will continue presenting the methodologies that we use, and also the results and policy implications. So the second question was related to the price and expenditure elasticities for local and imported rice. So to compute expenditure and price elasticities, we estimated a demand system model. Specifically, we estimated a quadratic almost ideal demand system model, which is an extension of the almost ideal demand system, which is part of the price independent generalized logarithmic class of demand models. And these type of models, they have budget shares that are linear functions of the log of total expenditures. So they do not necessarily allow for non-linearity in the angle curves. That is the reason why we decided to use the quadratic almost ideal demand system model that is well developed in Banks, Blundell, and Leubel. So here, just to give some ideas on the specification of the demand system, the Côte demand system model. So following Banks, Blundell, and Leubel, we assume that the Côte has an indirect utility function So of this form, it's the log of the indirect utility function is equal to this expression here. And here, what is between the brackets here is the indirect utility function of a price-independent generalized logarithmic demand system model. And here, M is the log of total expenditures, P are the food prices. And again, as Fatou said, we grouped the different food items that we have in our data set into, I think, 9 to 10 categories, but I will present that later. So when we apply race identity to this expression, we have the food budget shares for each food group that can be expressed in this way. And here, as you can see, we have this quadratic term here that allows for some nonlinearity in the angle curves. So to derive the expenditure and price elasticities, we differentiated the budget share equation with respect to the log of total expenditure and with respect to the prices. Here, when I is equal to J, we will have the own price elasticities, and when they are different, we will have the cross price elasticity. So using these expressions here, the expenditure elasticities are written in this way. And for the price elasticities, we have the uncompensated or Marshallian price elasticities. Just to recall that the Marshallian demand is obtained when maximizing the utility, but subject to the budget constraint, while the Hicksian or compensated demand is obtained when minimizing the expenditures subject to a given utility. So they are primal and dual programs. So here we compute the two elasticities that are expressed in this way. So this is the Marshallian or uncompensated price elasticity of demand, and this is using the Slutsky equation, we derive the Hicksian or compensated price elasticity of demand. So these are additional theoretical restrictions that are imposed in the model. And to estimate this Côte's model, we used Stata, specifically the command @sils. So just to show some results, so these are descriptive results. So here we have the dependent variable of the double hurdle model, which is the monthly quantity of local rice consumed by the different households. And here, as you can see, we have a significant difference between rural average monthly consumption of local rice between rural and urban households. And so here, urban households consume more local rice monthly than rural households. And so this can be, we assume that if we had included, or at least if we had data on the Senegal River Valley, this mean for rural areas would have been higher. So we also have other differences between the two samples that are related to socio-demographic characteristics, and these are usually seen in West Africa, in African countries. So here, for instance, we have that more rural households, more female, we have more male-headed rural households compared to urban households, and also rural households heads are usually, they have they are more educated, well, in terms of formal education, and also they have higher levels of education compared to, well, what am I saying? Urban households are more educated and they have higher levels of education compared to their rural counterparts. And also there are other differences that can be observed. For instance, in rural households, they have more children compared to urban households, and also the dependency ratio here is higher for rural households. We were expecting the contrary though. And the merit status is also different between urban and rural households. Rural households heads being, we have higher proportions of rural household heads that are married compared to urban households. So these are just to show the main differences that we observe between the two samples. And here we have some specific variables that are just specific to rural households. For instance, the membership of a farmer in a farm organization, also the total area owned by the households. These are variables that are specific to rural households that are involved in agricultural activities. And also we have other information here. These are the ownership of asset ownership, refrigerator, the number of refrigerators, cars, and so on and so forth that are only observed in the urban household survey. So again, this is a proxy for income for urban households, and for rural households, we use the total number of hectares owned as a proxy for income, for wealth. So here again, we have, these are our these Greater Dakar secondary town and other towns and valley. These are our strata for the urban areas. In Greater Dakar, we have the capital city of Senegal and also the suburbs, the cities in the suburbs. In the secondary towns, we have the towns that are not far from the capital region and that are big urban cities as well. And other towns are all the towns that are not in these two groups. And valley is the main, it's the households that live in valley, which is the main rice producing area. But this is just for urban households. We are not including this area here in rural households. So here also there are other descriptive statistics related to the expenditure shares of the different food groups. So as I said, we divided the food items in our data set into groups. So for rice, for instance, we considered each category of rice as a group itself. It's a group with just one element inside. So we have broken local rice, imported rice, broken imported, whole grain local, whole grain imported, and also the other cereals, legumes, fruits and vegetables, meat, fish, and poultry, and dairy products and other foods, food items that are not included in the pre-cited food groups. So, so that is the first part of this, and the second part we have the stone price indices. Just to say that the stone price indices here, they are average, weighted average prices within food groups and within administrative regions. So here, one thing that is interesting in here is that we have found that rural households, they spend more money in imported rice compared to urban households. And also, the other interesting thing here is that urban households, they spend more money on local rice compared to rural households. Well, concerning the local rice, maybe this can be explained by the fact that in rural areas, although they are rain-fed, they still produce local rice. So, so they have their own consumption, and maybe the amount that they need to buy from the market is lower compared to urban households. So here, these are stone price indices, and the differences are significant between the two groups, rural and urban households, except for the prices for dairy products and the other goods. So here we have the results for the determinants of local rice consumption. So here, rather than, we mainly reported here the results from the selection equation, namely the decision to consume local rice or no, and also the marginal effects, because the quantity variable directly, how can I say it? It cannot be directly interpreted. It does not make much sense to interpret that quantity equation. So here we reported the marginal values, the marginal effects, but we will mainly concentrate on the decision to consume or no in this presentation for a matter of time, and we would like to have some comments and suggestions for our work. So here, as we can see here, there are some socio-demographic characteristics that affect the decision to consume local rice. For instance, we don't have the same determinants between urban and rural households, but just maybe before going to that, it's important to note the difference between the two models that we have for urban households. So the first model here, it has almost the same variables. What is different is that, as you can see here, we have the different strata that are included in the first urban model, while in the second urban model, we disaggregated the strata Greater Dakar to have to see whether there is some hidden effect between Dakar and its suburbs. So that was important to highlight. So for the determinants, as we can see, for instance, being when households that are headed by men have lower chances of consuming local rice compared to their female household headed counterparts in rural areas. And also the other result is that when households in which the head has not been to school, formal school, they have lower chances of consuming local rice as well. And the other result is that higher dependency ratios are associated with lower chances of consuming local rice. Just to say here that the dependency ratio we computed by dividing the number of adults by the number of children. And so, yeah, and another interesting result is that higher asset ownership is associated with lower consumption of local rice. So as households get wealthier, they tend to consume less of, well, their chances of consuming local rice decreases. And this is also seen in rural areas where we consider the area that is allocated, the area that is owned by the household as a proxy for wealth. So the other interesting results are related to location, the location of the different households. And here, when we look at these location-specific variables here, we see that households that are located in Greater Dakar, secondary towns and valley have higher chances of consuming local rice compared to the other households that are not in these towns here. And what is behind this is that the idea behind, for instance, the greater living in Greater Dakar or secondary town is that in these towns here, we have big urban markets. It means this hints that the households that are in towns where they have access to market, they have higher chances of consuming the product. And for the valley sign here, it can be explained by the fact that these urban households, they live near the main rice producing area, which eases their access to the product. And so the results are quite the same in the two urban models. And there is also just another location-specific aspect here, which is related to Dakar. For instance, we have disaggregated in the model urban 2, Greater Dakar, which is composed of the main capital city of Senegal, Dakar, and its suburbs. And when we look at here, we see that the positive sign that is associated to Dakar is mainly related to the fact that households living in the suburbs have higher chances of consuming local rice. And behind this sign, it can be explained by the fact that local rice has been advertised in these suburbs. There have been some advertising campaigns around local rice in the suburbs. So we hypothesize that that's the reason why living in these suburbs increases the chances of consuming local rice. So when we look at the results on income and own price elasticities, so here we are just showing the results for local and imported rice. We do have other results for the other food groups, but it would be too long to present here. So when we look at the own price elasticities, the differences are not very big between urban and rural households. We see that all the own price elasticities are negative, which is consistent with demand theory. And also we see, just to recall that price elasticity means when price increases by 1%, by how much, well, what is the percent change in consumption? So here we see that when price both local and imported rice increases by 1%, the consumption of both products decreases by less than 1%. And this means that the demand is inelastic for both products and in both areas, both in urban and rural areas. However, we see here that it's more inelastic in rural areas. It's slightly more inelastic in rural areas compared to urban areas, and also it is slightly more inelastic for imported rice compared to local rice. And when we look at the expenditure, well, the income elasticities, we see that when income rises by 1%, both the consumption of both local and imported rice increases by, but it increases by less than 1%, which means that both goods can be considered as normal goods. However, we see here that for rural areas, the income elasticities are higher, and this can, so it's almost like a superior good in rural areas, and this can be explained by the fact that in rural areas, households mainly consume traditional. Historically, they consume traditional cereals such as millet, maize, sorghum, and so on and so forth. So as they get rich, they start consuming high standard goods. So rice can be considered quite as a high standard good, and so they can start consuming it more when their income rises. And here we have the cross price elasticities, and yeah, so these are the cross price elasticities. When the price of local rice, as we can see here, when the price of one of the goods increases by 1%, looking at the compensated cross price elasticities, when the price of one of the goods increases by 1%, the consumption of the other good increases. It increases by less than 1%, which means that they are not perfect substitutes, but since it increases, they are substitutes. But that is looking for compensated cross price elasticities. And surprisingly, we have these results here for the uncompensated price elasticities that shows a negative, that shows a negative elasticity, which is surprising to us. And we are still exploring why we have this result in here. So in terms of conclusion and policy implications, so the main messages, we have some main messages regarding the determinants of local rice consumption. And based on the results, we see that location, households location is very important in local rice consumption, because it can ease or make difficult the access to the product. It means that in addition to in addition to focusing on preferences of consumers, which is very important and which should be continued, and also in addition to focusing on increasing rice production, policies should also think of improving the accessibility of the product, both physically and financially. And the physical access can be done, for instance, through the improvement of infrastructures that can allow households to have better access to markets. So all these policies should go hand in hand, increasing production, increasing rice quality, but also making sure that the product is accessible. And again, also a message regarding the location of the households. We have also seen that when households are located in areas where there have been communication around the product, households have higher chances of consuming local rice. So this means also that communication around the product is very important, at least to raise awareness of its health benefits and also the quality improvements that have been made in the production side, because there are some varieties that are, in terms of quality requirements, that meet consumers' quality requirements. However, sometimes consumers do even not know whether those varieties exist. So communication around the product is also important. So, so this means that there are many policies that should go hand in hand to improve, to scale up the production of local rice, increase its quality, but also ensure that households consume it. And the main message regarding the substitutability between the local and imported rice, as we have seen, we have found that they are substitutes. However, they are not perfect substitutes. So they are not completely substitutable at this stage. And also, good data is also part of the solution, and this is not stressed enough. As you have seen, we could not include the Senegal River Valley, which is an important area when it comes to local rice production, because the data did not allow us to do so. It was not available. So good data is also part of the solution. So in terms of the limits of the study, so we did not include detailed preference information due to data availability again. And also we did not disaggregate in the, you have seen that when I was presenting the elasticities, price and income elasticities, I did not, we grouped the different categories of rice, imported rice and local rice into just, well, for instance, broken local rice and whole local rice was grouped into local rice, and the same was done for imported rice. And that was mainly because there is a low proportion of consumption for the disaggregated categories. So it would be interesting to have the results by category of rice as well, because we can find different degrees of substitution between the different categories of rice. And also, as I said, since we did not include the Senegal River Valley, so it's as if we are underestimating the own consumed rice. So thank you for your attention, and we will be happy to have your comments and suggestions for improvement.
Thank you very much, Amy and Fatou, for this presentation. We can open now for questions. So if you like, you can just raise your blue hand or write your comment and question in the chat, and I will read out loud. Well, I see that here Oliver wrote something in the chat. So let me see. So the demand for rice imported or local may be driven by the price of the alternative cereals as well. The cross-price elasticities you showed may not adequately capture the dynamics on demand for rice per se. Prices of other major cereals in Senegal, such as millet, sorghum, and maize, corn, may influence the demand for rice. So here goes the comment from Oliver. I don't know if you want to react to the comments.
Yeah, and we completely agree with that comment. We also computed the cross price elasticities with the other goods, namely the other cereals and also the other food groups that I presented. And definitely the price of the other cereals do affect the consumption of rice, but it's just that here we did not present it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know whether Fatou has something to add to that.
Yes, you're right. We did not present those results, but we have them, and we see that they are substitute rice and major cereals.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. More questions for Amy and Fatou? Well, maybe I can ask a quick question. You mentioned that in your introduction, Fatou, you showed a graph showing how production of rice has increased in Senegal, and you mentioned that this was mostly associated with the adoption of fertilizer and maybe more easier access to finance, right, and equipment. But do you have any information about to what extent improved rice varieties are used in Senegal, maybe high yielding varieties? and even varieties that might be better adapted to climatic shocks?
Okay, thank you for your question. So in Senegal, the adoption of improved rice varieties is the highest for all cultures, for all crops. For rice, for example, we are around 70% of adoption of improved varieties in the Senegal River Valley, as well in the rain-fed areas. So new varieties of rice are well adopted because producers, they know that once they produce rice, they will have a market to sell it.
Okay.
So the adoption is very important for rice compared to millet or sorghum.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I see another question here from Abdul Rashid. He asks in the chat, does your data include those who consume both local and foreign rice?
Yes, it does include that. It does include, yeah. In these consumers, you have some that consume only local, others that consume only imported, and some households that consume both local and imported.
In your, oh, no, okay, so let's go to Alicia first. Alicia, please.
Thank you very much for this presentation, very interesting presentation. So I also find that it's very interesting that you are approaching from the demand side, because this is an area where there is a gap and most of the focus was on the supply side. So on the demand side, what I found very interesting is that the price of imported broken rice is 3 times more expensive than the price of domestic broken rice. Yeah, and actually imported broken rice is also 3 times more expensive than whole imported rice. So despite all this being 3 times more expensive, apparently the price elasticity for imported rice, broken rice, is smaller than for domestic broken rice. So there is a very strong consumer preference for imported broken rice. So I was wondering, what would be the policy conclusions from that? Is it something to do with price policies when you are putting tariffs? So price tariffs, you are putting price tariffs for imported broken, or is it something to do about quality perceptions, actual quality and quality perceptions? And I was wondering also in that regard, maybe something that is not in the model, and I don't know how you can capture it. Is there some kind of signaling effect of status if you consume imported broken rice? So you know, if it's local broken rice, if you are consuming imported broken rice, you are kind of signaling that you are have higher status in society, something like that. So that's also kind of non-price factor influencing consumption. So I was wondering, what would be the policies? What would be from the policy side? Obviously, what you want to do is to increase local rice consumption, to create some sort of chain reaction so that the farmers can benefit more and there is more consumption of local. But how you are planning, how you are suggesting it should be done? Thank you.
Thanks, Alicia.
Thank you, Alicia. I think that I will partially respond to your questions. Well, I think that concerning the signaling effects, I do think, well, we hypothesize that in rural areas, the signaling effect exists because not everyone can afford buying imported broken rice in those areas. So when you start buying it and consuming it, it does signal something about your social status. So maybe these are interesting things that can also be investigated in this matter. So for policy implications, I will let Nefa to say something if she has some ideas, because this is still fresh for us, and we are still thinking of the policy implications that stem from the price, from the elasticities that we obtained. But thank you for your comment. That's very interesting, and we will keep that in mind.
Yes, Alicia, thank you very much. Your comments are really interesting, and maybe there are some results that I did not notice, and you talked about them. So regarding the strong preference, that's what the literature shown, that Senegalese households, they have a strong preference of imported broken rice. So this is in line with the literature, what we found. And why do we find this? There are many explanations, as you said, maybe related to quality, because as Ami was saying, if you go to rural areas, the local rice they have access to is not a good quality local rice. So there are households which have more income that could afford buying a good quality rice, which is the imported one. And so there is some signal in here. And in urban areas, it is starting to come. We start to have good quality local rice with branding, and households are starting to buy this kind of rice. But still, we have many households which prefer broken imported rice. And this is related to the explanation I gave at the beginning. Our main dish is rice with fish. And this rice with fish, households, they prefer using broken rice and using a good quality broken rice, which now we have it as imported. We start to have a good quality local rice, but at some period of the years, you cannot find it, and the qualities are different, and many households still rely on broken imported rice.
Thank you, Amy and Fatou. We have another question here in the chat from Carlos Sede. He says, a number of your descriptive variables you use to explain demand patterns, such as education, location, male-headed households, probably all reflect income levels. Did you try to create some index as a proxy for per capita income?
Well, so far we have used as a proxy for income, what we have used was the asset ownership, which consisted of the number of cars, TVs, and refrigerators owned by for urban households, and for rural households, we used the area owned. But yeah, computing an asset index can be also a way to go, and maybe we will think of well, an asset index maybe that we can compute with the data sets that we have.
Still somehow related to model specification, if I remember correctly, in your double hurdle model, your outcome variable is monthly consumption of local rice, right, in kg. But is that being normalized by adult equivalents or number of household members or something like that? I imagine that for the decision to adopt local rice or not, that won't make much of a difference, but in the total quantities, it might, right?
Yeah, you are definitely right. Well, we did compute that, and we did try to estimate the model by using the quantity per capita. And the differences were not that high in terms of, we almost did not have differences in the determinants. But definitely the quantity consumed per capita might make a difference. It can be interesting to show that as well in the descriptive statistics. And in the paper, we did include descriptive statistics on consumption per capita. So.
Okay, thank you. Some more questions? Well, I have yet another one, if I may. Well, although I know that your study is more related to the consumer side, but I have a question that's more related to the production side, I guess. To me, it was very interesting to learn that in Senegal, broken rice is what's mainly consumed, right? But as far as I know, in Southeast Asia, broken rice would be considered some sort of byproduct, right, of rice production. So I was wondering if there is also a market for other kinds of byproducts from rice, such as, I don't know, feed for livestock or feed for fish. Well, in Asia, people use byproducts from rice to make noodles, for example, right? But I imagine that noodles not a thing in Senegal, rice noodles, but yeah, how is there a market for these other byproducts? And also, then what is done with the whole grains, right, of rice? If we think of broken rice as a byproduct of rice production, then what about the whole grains?
Maybe I will try to answer. So for your first question, yes, we have here byproducts from rice, and they are used to feed livestock, as you said. Mm-hmm. This is a market which is increasing. We did not use to give byproducts from rice to our livestock, but now people start to do it. In the past, we used to use we used to give them millet, maize, or sorghum, but now we have byproducts from rice, which are used to feed the livestock. And the second question, what is regarding whole grain? We consume whole grain. It is just that broken rice is preferred given our main national dish, but many households, we consume whole grain, but because the national dish, maybe we cook it like once, twice a week. The other days, every day we have rice as lunch. In the majority of Senegalese household, every day, rice is lunch. So when it is not broken, chebujan, so rice and fish, we use broken as white rice, and we cook a sauce to accompany this is like two kind of dishes, national dish and other dishes in which we use whole grain. So we still consume whole grain, but just that broken is like more popular.
Okay, thank you, Fatou, for the clarification. Let me see here. Well, Carlos has another comment. He says here in the chat, a key policy implication would be to analyze in more detail what characteristics of imported broken rice make it a preferred good. This could inform rice plant breeding as well as investments in processing technology. I don't know if Amy or Fatou want to react to his comment.
Yes, and he is definitely right. And there have been studies on the preference side that have shown the different characteristics of rice that can push a consumer to consume a given type of rice, and mainly those are, for instance, the size of the grains, the ease of cooking. And there are also many other characteristics that have been found in the literature to determine the choice of consuming a given type of rice. Independent of where it comes from, there are some quality requirements, quality criteria that the households are looking for in the rice, in the different categories of rice. And when they find it in a given category of rice, they are prone to consuming it, whether it is imported or local. And that means that local rice can be competitive compared to imported rice if the quality requirements are met.
Mm-hmm. Do you have plans for a follow-up study or to analyze exactly the different characteristics of rice and what exactly consumers might be looking for when shopping for rice in terms of these different characteristics, right? Are there any plans for that, or do you have any insight from maybe other studies?
Yeah, I do know that at Israel, some colleagues were involved in looking at the different characteristics of local or imported rice that can affect consumers' choices, but I don't know whether it is still continued or no. I will let Fatou say more about that.
Yes, we had a colleague who was working on this. She did many experiments in urban households to look for the quality criteria that push people to consume local or imported rice. So her results are very, very interesting, and now she is on the way to publish them. But this is taking too much time.
Yeah.
But the survey is done and data are analyzed. She only needs to write the paper. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And she was our colleague, so we can work on her also to publish another paper following this one to discuss more about the quality criteria.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I imagine that such study could also provide some insight on something that Alicia mentioned regarding if there is some preferences related to status, right? How households perceive their status when they consume one type of rice as opposed to another. Abdul Hashid, please.
Hello. Thank you for the presentation. So it just came to my mind because Nigeria, we have similar policy towards rice. But then one of the implications was that now there is increased rice smuggling into the country. So through the borders from Niger and Benin, officially rice import has decreased, but then the smuggling has increased substantially. So I want to see if there is similar thing in Senegal. And also some people now, what they do, they import the rice because they don't want government to know they're importing. So they change the bag into the local bag, right? So they sell it in the market as a local rice, but in reality it is a foreign rice. And then this now makes it difficult for identification in empirical research. So is this similar thing in Senegal, maybe?
I think that I will let Fatou answer to that question.
Can you please repeat the first question? I did not get it very well.
So smuggling, like illegal imports of rice.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So through the official
okay.
import routes.
Yes. We suspect that this may happen here. We did not study, but we suspect this may happen because we know that in our countries, people, they always find ways to do not follow the rules. And so we may suspect that we have, despite the import bans, importators are still importing rice. And here, our specificity is also the Gambia, which is inside Senegal. And one of our co-authors, John McPhee, he was talking about this. He was saying that when he was in Senegal as a volunteer, rice was coming from the Gambia. So we may suspect also that importators, they are using the Gambia to continue importing local rice. And your second question also related to changing the bags, maybe we have it here. We will investigate. And we plan to talk with like importators, wholesalers, to know if they respect these bans, and if not, what do they do. Tomorrow we have a workshop with one of them, and I will try to talk with him to ask him some questions on these issues. But absolutely, you are right. Maybe this is happening here, and we may document it. Thank you very much.
Regarding this smuggling from and to the Gambia, I know this is just hypothesizing, right? But would this be because of price differences, or is there really some significant differences in terms of quality between rice that's produced domestically in Senegal versus what's produced in the Gambia?
Maybe it will not be rice produced in the Gambia, but from Asia, but facing to Gambia. And we had a workshop 2 years ago with wholesalers, and they told us that selling imported rice is cheaper than selling local rice for them. So they prefer to sell importing rice, because if they have to sell local rice, there are too many transaction costs, even if it's coming from Senegal.
I see.
Yeah. So they still prefer to sell imported rice.
Mm-hmm. Well, do we have any last questions for Fatou and Amy? Or Amy, yes?
So if no one has a question, I have a question because when we were trying to estimate the demand system, we tried another method, the easy EASI demand system, which allows for any form of the angle curves. However, we had issues estimating it because it had an initial package in R that was withdrawn. We wanted to estimate it in R, but the package was withdrawn, so it was not possible anymore. And the two possibilities that we had using Stata, the first one used the package in R indirectly, and the other method, we did try it, but had elasticities that were very weird. So that's the reason why we decided to leave aside that method and use the Côte's technique. However, if anyone here has already used that, the easy demand system has already estimated it, we would be happy to have feedback on that. it's theoretically a good model, but estimating it has been very, very difficult, and many packages have been withdrawn and all those things. So.
Well, there you go then. If someone has some insights, please do contact Amy and Fatou. Well, I want to thank you, Amy and Fatou, for your presentation. It was very interesting. Thanks very much for sharing your work with us today. And thank you all for participating in this colloquium. I hope to see you all next week. So for now, have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.